Good morning again. So I'd like to move on to part two from the perspective of the academic member of the panel here to describe how we got to this place and try to reconstruct the natural history of what science, the paradigm of science communication has evolved and what are the potential solutions and how we could get to that. So it's a reality that there's a lot out there. You know, there was a time when I began my career back in the mid-'70s or so, you know, there was, you know, in my field of expertise, I could read pretty much everything that was out there. So this shows the number of articles in the Scopus database, which is much broader than the PubMed, which is essentially caters to the medical, biomedical, life sciences communities. And the numbers of, since 1950, 55 million items in Scopus, in the last 10 years alone, 23 million. In PubMed, which is part of the National Library of Medicine, 9.3 million just in the last 10 years alone. So it's just absolutely impossible. There has been a tremendous growth here, and more or less coinciding in the mid-'80s, early '90s, we have this sort of phase of exponential growth, which coincides more or less, not surprisingly, with the advent of the internet facilitating, of course, communication. Back in my days, when I began science, you had to type up a paper, have 6 copies, photocopies, type up your letter to the editor on a Selectric IBM. You heard of an IBM Selectric typewriter. Put that, sent by Federal Express to a journal in Europe, in North America, and eventually the editor would pick 2 copies, send to 2 reviewers. Eventually the reviewers declined reviewing that. They have another 2 and so on. So about 6 months later you would hear about the results. And about a year and a half later, if you're lucky and your article was accepted in that journal, that prestigious journal that you admire, eventually you notched 1 score in your publisher perish trajectory in your career. So the internet, of course, electronic publishing, modified all of that enormously. So the precursor conditions to that crisis that we face right now are the following. These are the root causes, you know, the advent of the internet in the mid-'90s and the birth of electronic publishing. That, of course, was a major facilitator in all of that. There are more scientists alive and working today than any point in history. So it's just a matter of fact. It's a lovely profession. I mean, we generate knowledge. It's a business of honor. You generate knowledge to improve society and humanity and your fellow human beings. Accessibility of scientific findings to the population have, by the very fact that the internet has facilitated that, there has been much easier access. So the old geeky scientific article is no longer a geeky scientific article. There's there are blogs that translate that and make it available and easily accessible to the public in general. The media has enormous attention. You know, much of what the medical field is all about is based on very easy to communicate information that people can understand. You know, whether eating red meat causes cancer, for instance. That's an easily item of communication that so this, in fact, creates an interesting situation because there's more that increased media attention leads to more scrutiny of the work of scientific findings in general. And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But that generates eventually case studies of scientific misconduct that become the public domain. Nowadays, you know, case in point, you have the Retraction Watch blogs that are devoted to highlighting, underscoring these findings, these case studies of scientific misconduct and eventually become quite visible out there, retractions and names and journals and association. We saw quite a few examples of that. This leads to a breakdown of public confidence in science and scientists in general. There's more of this mistrust. This profession, what brought me 40 years ago to the profession of science was this lovely opportunity to be able to do something to my fellow human being and generate knowledge. And there's also, of course, the fact that there's a career behind the scenes, the frustration of the publisher perish model, which leads to pleas out there for transparency, an abolition of what has been the sacred paradigm, the peer review system, the single-blinded peer review system, which has existed for centuries, in fact. So this has all led to conditions for a perfect storm. And so the first one, the perception that those publishers, those that in fact publish in the journals we respect and admire, they're greedy. And in fact, electronic publishing has lowered the cost of their operation enormously. I'm not going to parse every one of these bullets, but you can pretty much recognize those as the ingredients of the past few years that have happened here. Elsevier, full disclosure here, Elsevier is the publisher of the journal that I'm editor-in-chief. has been boycotted by over 10,000 scientists not too long ago, about 4 years ago. And it's a big business, you know, the profit that exists for publishers, including some of my colleagues here on the table. This is a reality, but that's, you know, the reality of life. This is, someone needs to produce high-quality science on that. So this has been one, which has, of course, perceived librarians are terribly irritated by publishers in general, universities as well. My university has a major problem in terms of budget to be able to maintain all of the journals. Enter the open access movement, which was, of course, about 15 years ago or so, came with a very noble vision of democratizing access to scientific information. And it, based on a very good principle, which is to just shift the cost, the economic burden, from those who read to those who actually generate that information. Presumably are the ones who competed for the money, got the grant, and they have the money to pay for publication of the article. And the advantage is that everything enters then in the public domain. It was quickly embraced by the scientific community. And eventually the success stories that began in the early 2000s were Biomed Central, BMC, which became a whole franchise of journals, very respected journals. Now Springer bought that. Public Library of Science, which was originally a concept by Harold Varmus, a Nobel Prize, and eventually PLUS also has a series of those. And eLife, of course, most recently, another Nobel Prize winner who eventually launched that, very well funded by some major sponsors. Again, conflict of interest. I'm an academic editor of the Public Library of Science as well with eLife. Then came the third condition for the perfect storm, which is the PLUS Medicine. Out of PLUS Medicine in 2006, the editorial board, and I'm one of them, and eventually we had a conference call and we talked about this new concept that PLUS wanted to try, which is PLUS One. And the suggestion was, we get so much good material that we have to reject. Why not give it a chance and give it the chance of this to come to the public domain? So we tried that in 2006. By the way, I'm in the record of having voted against the launch of PLUS One, but I was outvoted enormously. In 2006, we went to beta testing, published 138 papers in the whole year. It went to 1,200 the next year, 2007, 2008, 2,700. By 2009, it was already the third largest journal in the world and got an impact factor from Thomson Reuters Journal Citation Reports, already an admirable 4.3 for something that had just come as become a de facto journal based on removing relevance, only soundness of science. If it is passable, you can read it, and reviewers can pass it as sound science. We don't care about relevance. We don't care whether this is going to be a change in clinical practice or in whatever practice it is provided. It's from astronomy to zoology. It will fit, and we'll publish it. By 2015, last year, it has already sort of plateaued in 1 out of every 40 of all PubMed entries, which is this respectable indexing by the National Library of Medicine. The impact factor has declined, but has stayed on a very appreciable little over 3. And it's right now the largest of all journals out there. The success of PLUS One eventually helped to maintain all of the PLUS journals altogether, eventually led to an enormous growth, and every other journal wanted to have a sister journal devoted to sound science and the open access, the gold open access model. This, in my view, based on the perspective that where I sit, has led to what Jeffrey Beal maintains very properly, the list of potential, possible, probable predatory publishers, which has now reached, as of 2016, and this is as of February, 923 publishers. As far as I know, there are more predatory publishers, possible, potential, and real predatory publishers than there are serious scholarly academic publishers out there. So the potential for more than potential. The reality is that the signal-to-noise ratio, which is the motto for my presentation here and my previous one, has already been distorted so tremendously in favor of noise. Signal has almost disappearing among the noise. The good journals, what can we do about that? And, just hammer on the best practices about scientific publishing. Of course, like my colleagues have just presented and espoused the various principles, I'm absolutely delighted to have been part of this panel and seeing how much good, good initiatives are coming along the pipeline here. These are the established and reputable academic publishers. I hammer those to my faculty members. The fact that there is an irritation about citations. And citations, let me repeat with you here. Why do we value citations in science? This is a great quote about attribution and credit. The assumption is that a citation has value, but why is it valuable? It's valuable because it defines a notion of credit and attribution in scientific communications, mechanism by which one author explicitly indicates that he or she has been influenced by the thinker or the work of another author. I have not seen a better description of what should be the ideal metric for an article, citation of the article. And eventually this cluster as journals have become this tyranny of the impact factors out there. And the predatory publishers, they know this very well. They crave credibility. And they have, of course, created this cottage industry of bogus impact factors, some of my colleagues have mentioned. And this is of late 2014. And the cynicism that they use just to ISI, as you can see, the prevailing acronym there is ISI, because they all want to go for the old Eugene Garfield ISI, which eventually Thomson Reuters dominated. But the reality is, we may not like it, but it is what separates us from the bad guys, from the good guys up until now. Unfortunately, some of the good journals and their people, eLife, in fact, abhors impact factors. They want different metrics. They want intrinsic value of the quality. But we haven't yet come up with a formula. We're in this wild west of coming up with a definition of what is good science out there. And it's not simple. But right now, what truly separates us as a barrier, unfortunately, is a monopoly called the impact factor, which is produced by only one vendor. So what can we do out there? Along the message that I do as a teacher in best practices, you know, my job is to make people aware of bad players such as bad actors, as has been mentioned here, as Omix, BIT in China, Jacobs Publisher, and a list of all others that, of course, are visible to me because of my perspective in the biomedical field. Invitation emails that start with greetings, and those are a giveaway, and I tell my faculty members as well. Adulation as a language in the emails, as I showed you in the first. And do not respond. I tell my faculty members, my students, and everyone who would like to listen, do not respond to emails, because that, when they will get your name, and eventually that response of yours, they can be using your email to add grandeur to them, to their understanding. Omix, as far as I'm concerned, is the worst of the players out there, and they are based in Hyderabad in India, has held conferences, they advertise speakers, they have big names such as Bruce Ames, a marquee name, eventually was attached to one of the conferences. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services sent Omix a cease and desist letter because of the fact they were using PubMed and other acronyms and logos from the U.S. government. So this is an absolutely shameless outfit out there. I eventually have been alerting so many colleagues about Omix. And one day I got this email from Omix after I convinced a colleague of mine to cancel her participation in one of their conferences. She's a very well-placed scientist. And she told Omix, well, I don't want to have to do anything with you. So I eventually, by name, got involved in this because I was the one accusing them. And this is the beginning of the mail. Dear Dr. Franco, greetings. We are not going to digest this. It's so disgraceful to see people with scientific morality whip their words without looking into the goal and vision of an organization. And mind you, this is a picture of this address in Westlake, Los Angeles, where they have this shopping mall here where they added some 200 journals out of this place here. And mind you, Omix, you know, even though they were very mad at me with this email, I'm happy to say that they keep on sending me invitations and they continue adulating me to participate in their outfit there. So they don't hold a grudge, evidently. Here's what I do. And I can do this from my bullet pulpit as chair of a department. And here's this two-part email. So I'm not going to ask you to read you, but I send this to my 220 faculty members. And I refresh that from time to time. And I do evaluations once a year as an academic, as a chair of the department. And I tell them, you are not going to accept invitations to be in the editorial board members of these journals. You're not going to publish in these journals. We're not going to recognize claims in your CVs, in your annual reports about these things. And I give them a roadmap about what to avoid. Of course, I rely heavily on Jeffrey Beal's roadmap for how to blacklist these journals, and I list some of the examples of the good publishers out there. And so this is an email that I send once a year to my constituency, and other departments, in fact, at McGill, they have taken upon themselves to do that. Here's another example of a wonderful coalition of sorts, much like what Don presented. This was the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and this was brought to my attention by Jeffrey Beal, in fact. They recently put together this resolution regarding predatory journals. Here's the link there, the URL. Again, I'm not going to suggest that you read all of this. You can do this later, and you can visit the link here. But it's an absolutely wonderful statement condemning the practice of predatory journals, and to exhort their constituencies, their faculty members, and their various universities and colleges to submit their papers to journals are recognized as following academic standards of excellence. So let me just, in conclusion here, unquestionably, open access is democratized access to information and scientific knowledge, and we have to respect that, but unfortunately there's a dark side to it. And this has triggered the business model that, as I mentioned to you, this natural history of this disaster created the epidemic of predatory publishers and also vanity conference organizers. They sense a business opportunity. They crave credibility. They have placed storefronts in Western countries, and eventually all this cottage industry of pseudo impact factors. My job, from a very limited perspective I have here, first of all, is to support the work that you folks do here in this panel here, as well as to use, and we must absolutely restore the dignity in the business of science. Science is the business of merit. It's the business where people who are persistent and they can actually contribute with their generosity of spirit and honor to be able to advance science and knowledge and provide knowledge to the public domain. That's absolutely essential to restore this dignity to our field.